Well, good morning, gang, and welcome back to this week's Morning Coffee and a Thought, brought to you by Wings of Faith Ministries here in Sarnia, Ontario. Good to be with you. I've got my coffee here. I hope you have yours. This morning, I want to take a thought from one of my favorite prophetic books in the Old Testament, a small prophetic writing, the book of Haggai. Actually, one of the first messages I ever preached as a minister was from this little writing, the book of Haggai. So the question that I want to ask you this morning, have you ever started an endeavor, but at some point in that endeavor or mission you had set out for yourself, you kind of lost focus and let it drift? And someone had to come along and kind of give you a kick in the pants to get you going again on that mission or endeavor that you were involved with. Well, that's what the book of Haggai is all about. And so we're going to get back to our thought in just a moment. But first of all, I want to remind you that Morning Coffee and a Thought can be seen every Friday beginning at 1 p.m. on our YouTube channel, and every Sunday morning on our Facebook page at 8 a.m. in the morning. And we hope you will join us. Also, if these thoughts or messages resonate with you, we hope you would like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we thank you for all of those who have subscribed. We really appreciate it. Also, if you have a prayer request, if you want information about the ministry, or you want to make a donation to us, you can do all of that at wingsoffaithministries.ca. So now let's get back to our thought. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians came and destroyed the city of Jerusalem, burned down all the important civic buildings, and of course, the temple. Now, after about 68 years, the Babylonian Empire in about 539 fell to the Persians and the Medes, and Darius became the new sheriff in town. And the Persians had a much different policy concerning populations and minorities within their empire. They wanted people to return back to their homelands that they had been deported from under the previous Babylonian Empire. And so the Israelites were allowed to return home if they chose to and rebuild the city of Jerusalem. All this took place in 539 BCE. Now, only about a shade over 40,000 Jews actually returned to the homeland. And that would have been over a period of 5 to 10 years. They came back in about 3 waves. But there was a lot of excitement among those that were returning. And of course, the first thing they wanted to do was to rebuild their place of worship, the temple. Now, there were 2 things going against this whole endeavor they were about to embark on. First of all, when they got home, they realized that the city of Jerusalem was nothing more than a heap of rubble. Now, there were a couple of thousand people that were left over, very poor people that the Babylonians chose not to deport to Babylon. But basically, they were poor subsistence farmers just growing vineyards in and around the city of Jerusalem. So the land or the opportunity there didn't look all that great. Secondly, the people surrounding them were not all that happy with the fact that these Jews were going to be returning and that they would be rebuilding the temple and, of course, important buildings and later a wall around the city. None of the people groups surrounding Jerusalem were overly happy about it. But in spite of all this, the work began in 538 to rebuild the temple. So the first thing they did was they built an altar over the place where the former altar had been, so they could start offering their sacrifices. Then they began to lay the foundation of the temple, and that probably took about 2 years. Now, some of the people groups that surrounded them initially came to the governor, Zerubbabel, and the high priest that had returned, Joshua, saying they wanted to help them in this rebuilding project. But Zerubbabel and Joshua kind of saw through the offer and said they were in no need of their help. These so-called friends ended up turning on them, and pretty soon they started threatening them about rebuilding their temple, because of course that would take up some of the resources in the Transjordan region, and it was also going to take money out of the coffers to rebuild this. So when the threats didn't work, pretty soon these people groups started writing to the Persian capital in Susa, asking for injunctions to stop the work on the temple. These people groups that surrounded them claimed that if the Israelites were allowed to rebuild, that pretty soon they would become rebellious and go against the Persian Empire. And to some degree, the Persian government believed some of these claims, and at one point ordered that the building of the temple be stopped. And so, for a period of almost 16 years, nothing was done after the foundation was laid. Now, since there was not a temple to build, the population turned and just started rebuilding the city and their own homes to live in. All this went on until 520 BCE, and all of a sudden on the scene comes two prophets, Haggai and the prophet Zechariah. And both these prophets have one mission in mind, and that is to give the population a good kick in the pants to get them to start back on the mission they were originally set to do, which was to rebuild the Jewish temple. So Haggai comes around in August of 520 and delivers his initial prophecies to the leadership and the people. Now, there's a challenge in this prophecy. Apparently, the people of Jerusalem, the Jewish people and surrounding villages, were not experiencing great harvests. They were having crop issues, money issues. And so Haggai challenges the people, saying, maybe you're experiencing this scarcity in your life because you've left your mission of building the temple. And so he challenges them that their scarcity has been caused by their wandering away from the initial mission that God had called them to. And so the people and the leadership, Zerubbabel and Joshua, take Haggai's words at face value, and they begin immediately to start work on the temple. And the temple would be completed about 516. So it only took them 4 more years to complete the structure. But I want to go back to the message of the prophet Haggai, because I think it really resonates with us today. When we come to Christ as believers. Not only do we enter into a relationship with Jesus Christ, but also a mission, an endeavor. We find that in the Gospels, that when the disciples came to Christ, they not only had a relationship with him, but they took part in the ministry. John said they baptized. Matthew 10 tells us that Jesus sent out his disciples 2 by 2, and they took on ministry themselves. So when we come to Christ, we have a mission that's imparted to us. And all of us are going to have different endeavors we partake in. But we're going to find out that the same thing that happened to these returnees to Jerusalem will also happen to us. The moment we start on an endeavor for Christ, that we receive our mission, we know what Christ wants us to do, there's going to be opposition to it. And that opposition can take many different forms. It could take criticism from other people. It could take setbacks, initial setbacks in our endeavors. We find that's what happened to the people of Israel in Moses' message. Initially, there were setbacks when the people wanted to be freed from Pharaoh's control. There will always be opposition to the things that Christ wants us to do in life. There will be roadblocks and obstacles. The idea behind it is the enemy of Christ wants us to stop the endeavor. He wants us to wander away from the things Christ has called us to, just like these exiles did in Jerusalem for over 20 years. So the question becomes, what do we do with that? Opposition is going to hit us. And the question becomes, do we let ourselves lose our focus and wander away from what Christ has called us to? Or do we fight through that opposition, knowing that Christ is with us and has called us to that endeavor? Opposition is going to happen. It happened in 538 BC. The enemies of the Jews initially threatened them, then wrote letters against them, anything they could do to stop the building of that temple, to stop the Jewish endeavor. And it's the same thing today. The moment we begin our endeavor that Christ has called us to, the enemy will be right there to provide some type of opposition to the call and the endeavor that we have received. Today, my word to you is the same as Haggai. You may have started something with Christ, an endeavor, a ministry that you've been called to. But due to criticism or due to other factors, opposition, obstacles have come in your way. And you've allowed those obstacles to make you wander off the trail that you were called to. And now you've totally lost focus or abandoned the endeavor altogether. Well, this may be your word from Haggai, that it's time to get back on the horse and continue your ride in life. Continue in the endeavor that God called you to. It is so easy sometimes to get derailed, and usually opposition is always the first thing that gets us to abandon what we're doing. We don't like criticism or objection to what we're doing in life. If Christ called you to something, he expects you to finish it. That's your calling. That's your job. No one else but you can do that. And that's why the enemy of our souls wants to try and derail us from the mission Christ has called us to. If you're here and listening to this week and you feel that that's exactly the path you follow, now is a good time to hear a word from the Lord. Get back on that horse. Get back at that endeavor. Get back to what Christ has called you to and fulfill that mission, knowing that the power of the Holy Spirit is behind you in your endeavor. Listen, enjoy your coffee, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you again next week.